Hello and welcome everyone to my review of Resident Evil Village, the sequel to 2017's Resident Evil 7. After the late-blooming success of Resident Evil 7, Village follows suit as a first-person survival horror game. Developed and published by Capcom, the hotly anticipated Resident Evil Village was released on May 7, 2021 for PC, PlayStation 4 and 5, as well as Xbox One and Xbox Series X and S. Like in Resident Evil 7, 2 Remake, and 3 Remake, Resident Evil Village was created using the RE engine. Development of Resident Evil Village started on August 8, 2016, about half a year before Resident Evil 7's release, which brings the total development time of Village to just over 4.5 years. The team used Resident Evil 4's approach to create a balance of combat, exploration, and puzzle solving. Director Morimasa Sato wanted to bring the essence of Resident Evil 4 while using Resident Evil 7 as the base for the game. Many places in RE Village were inspired by real locations in Europe. Most notably, Castle Dimitrescu was inspired by Peles Castle in Romania that was built on an existing medieval route that linked Wallachia and Transylvania. The castle is every bit as grand as its real-life or in-game counterpart, however you want to look at it, and Peles Castle now houses a museum you can visit. The snowy weather you'll find yourself in was inspired by the team's research trip to Europe, where they experienced a cold snap. The rural countryside was a nice change from the mostly urban environments of the last few entries. With that background information out of the way, let's jump into the review. While it uses the RE engine, I found myself slightly disappointed in some of the parts of Resident Evil Village, especially when compared to how good the second and third remake games looked. The wheat fields, trees, and vegetation in particular didn't have the texture quality I would have expected from a Resident Evil game. It wasn't a big deal since it still looked good enough. I guess I was just expecting a little more. However, the game does shine once you reach the castle. Just like how the castle's real-life inspiration was designed with summer retreats in mind, the grand in-game castle was also fitted with crenellated guard towers, tall spires, and of course, a drawbridge and moat to resemble the castles of old. Much like the estate from Resident Evil 1, the castle's labyrinth-like floor plan was great for setting the haunted mansion atmosphere. Filled with everything a king or queen could desire, the royal homestead is complete with great halls, vaulted ceilings, an opera hall for decadent luxury, numerous chambers and suites for guests and servants, an armory, a wine room, and what's a castle without a dungeon? The flickering light emanating off lanterns and the dancing flames in the fireplace created a hauntingly eerie atmosphere perfect for a horror game. As the dim, warm yellow glows fill the cold halls, admire the Gothic architecture and ornate designs within the Grand Chateau. Cold, eerie, sprinkled with tasteful jump scares, Mr. Baker, Tyrant, and Nemesis all reprise their roles as the busty Lady Dimitrescu. Lady Dimitrescu didn't feel as scripted as Nemesis from the RE3 remake, and was more akin to Tyrant in the RE2 remake with her audible footsteps and pathing around the castle. Aside from her looming figure, the fear that strikes you as she turns her head to take notice of you was so well done. As she chases you within the castle, she wields her retractable claws with fatal deadliness. Trust me, these are not the kind of claw marks you want. Also, sorry to disappoint, but her daughters look nothing like their profile picture. But to complement your vampiric fetishes, there's plenty of enemy variety to keep things from going stale. Lycans, undead, creepy dolls, your own shadow, you name it. The lighting in the game really helps etch that fear into your mind, and RE Village does a good job balancing the calm and hair-raising moments. The game is well optimized now that patches have resolved most of the major issues, mainly stuttering. Lighting is critical when creating this sort of atmosphere, and while ray tracing is an option, it can deliver a hit to performance. You can mitigate this by enabling fidelity effects to maximize performance, which functions similarly to Nvidia's DLSS, but I found the lighting and shadows to be fantastic even without real-time ray tracing. Capcom, however, has somehow failed when creating the terrible menu controls on PC. I didn't think it was possible to fail so hard at something so basic. Simply navigating the graphics settings menu with the mouse and keyboard was unpleasant, slow, and unintuitive. But luckily, once you've settled on the settings you like, you'll likely never have to revisit this trauma. Capcom, take note, I wanted the horror in the core game, not in the settings menu. If you played RE7, you'll once again play as Ethan Winters. Taking place after the events in Louisiana, Ethan and Mia have been relocated to Eastern Europe by Chris Redfield. As they're adjusting to their lives as parents, trouble always seems to follow not too far behind. With Mia cooking in the kitchen, a bottle of wine ready to be poured, and you carrying the most precious thing in the world, what seemed to be another cold winter night was abruptly turned upside down by none other than the man who sent you here. Separated from the only family he has left, Ethan makes his way into the titular village where the game begins. Read notes scattered about and talk to your creepy neighbors to get a sense of what transpired. Fight through hordes of lichen, horny vampires, and the undead to find out why this place is more dangerous than you thought possible. Like in Resident Evil 7, Village continues in first-person perspective. The village gives a more open-world feel, while Castle Dimitrescu is very reminiscent of the mansion from RE1. True to Resident Evil fashion, you'll be traveling back and forth between the village and its surrounding area. While not new, RE Village allows Ethan more freedom while traversing. You can hop over fences, climb ledges, and even freely enter and exit through windows. The puzzles were well designed and up to the usual Resident Evil standard. Backtrack with newly acquired items to open up pathways to new areas. If you're ever lost, you can use your map to see if there are any places you may have missed. Like in previous entries, the map will also show you if areas have been completely searched, making backtracking a little easier. Not commonly found in Resident Evil games is an in-game merchant. With a newly introduced character called the Duke, you may stop by his caravan to purchase and sell items and upgrades. Enemies drop loot, either in the form of money called lei, or items that can be used or sold. The Duke will provide you with goods to buy and upgrade paths for your weapons. The resource management system in Village has been tweaked, and some items have been recategorized. Crafting materials and key items no longer occupy precious inventory space. Additionally, you can no longer use basic herbs to heal, but rather must use them to craft first aid meds. Craft healing salves from herbs and chemical fluids, and craft ammunitions from scraps and gunpowder. The save rooms in Village no longer house a chest to stash extra items, but rather relies on Ethan carrying everything. I found the new inventory system quite forgiving, and if you ever need more space, you can purchase capacity upgrades from the Duke. If you've ever played Dungeons & Dragons, I imagine Ethan carrying all his items in a bag of holding. Gameplay is a fraction faster than Resident Evil 7 as Village adopts a slightly more action-focused style, without straying too far from its roots. Overall, RE Village has faster combat than RE7, 2 Remake, and even 3 Remake. Your accuracy will improve if you allow the reticle to focus, but it also felt like the reticle focused faster in Village than in those 3 games as well. The good news is that the controls were accurate, smooth, and responsive, and well up to the task to handle the faster gameplay. The camera work was also well done, never glitching or providing a subpar experience. Quite a few enemies will be thrown at you, and some enemies, such as lichens, can close the distance quite quickly. Luckily, the game gives you plenty of pathways to run around and put space between you and the enemies. The undead in the castle are more like your traditional zombies. Apart from Lady Dimitrescu, her vampiric daughters, and the lichen outside, the undead are mindless and slower, but they have weapons, carrying all manner of medieval weaponry such as swords, axes, and sickles. You aren't completely defenseless as you'll have a block ability that can also be used to push enemies back, to buy you a couple seconds to run or to land another shot. Unlike Jill's dodge or Carlos's punch from RE3 Remake, Ethan's block does not require perfect timing to execute. Just hold the block button and the game will prompt you to perform a knockback. Many buildings and rooms are designed with connected walkways in mind, so being mindful of your environment can be the difference between life and death. Backpedaling in rooms and hallways can be an effective strategy to maintain distance while also dealing damage. They've added the ability to perform a 180-degree turn with the press of a single button. Although every time this would have been useful, I pretty much just panicked and forgot this function even existed. But it is there if you remember to use it. The pacing of the game was fairly good, and it didn't feel rushed nor excessively sluggish. While there were some segments that were a bit long-winded, events in the game were for the most part well spaced apart, so that you never experienced a debilitatingly long lull between major narrative events. You'll have the choice of 3 difficulties to select from initially: Casual, Standard, and Hardcore. An additional difficulty opens after your first successful completion, which will make things better at killing you. If you die enough times on Standard, the game will ask you if you want to switch to Casual, but if you do, you will no longer have the option to revert back. I like the difficulty options as it gives the players the ability to tailor the game to their own preferences. Make the game too easy and it no longer becomes scary. Too hard and the game becomes joyless tedium. Choose the difficulty that balances challenge and anxiety, and you'll have a good time. Collectors will find a few things hidden throughout the world. Well-placed wooden bobblehead goats and shiny little objects will give you a jolt of dopamine. Shooting down birds in bird cages will usually yield money or materials. RE Village adds a gameplay mechanic to hunt animals for meat that is unlocked later in the game, which gives RE Village a more open world feel. Present these to the Duke to permanently improve your overall constitution. A great sound design is integral to a horror game's success, and it was very well executed here. The silence, village winds, crackling logs in fireplaces, and the all too audible footsteps of Lady Dimitrescu created a great atmosphere. The music was good and although not memorable, produced a steady sense of trepidation. There were many characters in Resident Evil Village, some old and some new. Everybody's role was well acted, but the dialogue was mediocre, as nothing jumped out at me and made me wince, nor was anything profound. Very much reminiscent of old horror films, the at times cheesy writing of RE Village, paired with the mostly good voice acting, made the dialogue serviceable. No BAFTA Game Award or Hugo Award will be given out for this game, but it wasn't so bad that it tarnished the experience. Like RE7, RE2 Remake, and RE3 Remake, RE Village captures the essence of a survival horror video game, and more importantly, the spirit of a Resident Evil game. If you haven't already done so, I'd recommend completing RE7 before starting Village, not only because this takes place after the events of 7, but also because Resident Evil 7 was a very good game on its own. Visually, Resident Evil Village is very appealing, and the castle's ambiance was masterfully created through great lighting and sound design. Jump scares were tasteful, and never reached a point where they became aggravating and unwelcomed. The story was solid and was told through some good voice acting and serviceable dialogue. The pacing for the most part was good, but there were some lulls here and there. Combat was very intense, and followed in Resident Evil 7's and Resident Evil 3 Remake's footsteps, but was a fraction faster. Unlike Resident Evil 3 Remake, which I liked but thought was a little bare for the price at launch, Village inherently presents more value simply because it's a longer game with more content. Outside of the laughably bad settings menu, Resident Evil Village delivers a refined and polished experience that upholds the Resident Evil standard. If you're in search of a good survival horror game, Resident Evil Village is one I'd recommend. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you thought of the video, and if you've played this game, what did you think of it? For the next major Resident Evil release, what would you like to see? Another remake? A sequel to Village? Or a continued story with older characters? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, see ya.
A little tighter. Tighter. Perhaps a hard spanking is in order. Too hard!
Men strange. You have them on your planet?
I'm afraid so.
What they for? Oh, you mean Snu Snu?
We hear tell men used for Snu Snu, but all we have go on our ancient legend and subscription to Cosmo.
Just FYI, I could be used for Snu Snu.
Silence! You want die like last men visit Amazonia?
What'd they die of?
Crushed pelvises.
Yes!
Oh, thank you, Lord in heaven.
After lengthy computations, I, Famputer, have decided the fate of the men. Famputer sentences them to death! By Snu Snu!
Yeah!
Yeah!